Madam Speaker, a number of members of the House have stood up to suggest that Parliament is the wrong place. This should not have been brought to Parliament. And there are two major arguments being made. One is that there is no substance to these allegations. Why are we spending our time in Parliament dealing with what is essentially a private family matter? The other is that there is potential substance, but that this needs to be better dealt with somewhere else. The first point I want to make is that coming to Parliament doesn't preclude anything else happening outside of Parliament. It's not a zero-sum game. 2 weeks have passed since the first allegations were made. Can you imagine that this would have been resolved in the courts in 2 weeks? Can you imagine that a special select committee could have been constituted, could have called witnesses, analyzed the problem, submitted a report in 2 weeks? Nothing else could have happened in 2 weeks. But if we had come to Parliament, as we have done today, and we have to debate the Home Team Core Bill, which I'll be speaking on sometime after this debate goes, if we have to debate about issues to do with our finances, about the Monetary Authority of Singapore, about other statutory boards, and we have a lingering suspicion about our process of government, about the authority of the members of this House to debate, to analyze, and to deal with the most pressing problems facing Singapore, how could we have gone forward? It's ridiculous to suggest that we can't talk about this in Parliament. We have to talk about this in Parliament. But I think the first point I find far more interesting, that there are no specifics. There is no evidence. There is no substance to the allegations. Don't let this go on. End this saga now, because there's nothing to it. And these are things that have been brought up by the PAP MPs, NMPs, by the opposition MPs. We have not yet had specifics about what we should be doing differently other than debating this in Parliament. A special select committee is an organ, is an instrument, or is a tool empowered by Parliament, as Mr. Pritam Singh has argued just now. How can we say that it will be better than Parliament if we say that there's something wrong fundamentally with Parliament? Yes, a special select committee has time and space and the opportunity to gather more evidence and to go into more detail, but it is given those powers by Parliament. And ultimately, it provides a report to Parliament. And the actions taken on its recommendations are done by Parliament. So if we're going to choose these routes, the one thing we cannot do is say that Parliament isn't an appropriate place to deal with these matters. The expectations we have in Singapore are high. The expectations of the parliamentary process, the expectations of prudence, probity, but even on the very pragmatic basis. We're expected to forward plan just about everything. You think back not many minutes ago, not many hours ago, to the parliamentary questions. And I was standing at this very same rostrum having to defend questions about the extent to which we could predict changes in our school landscape. 15 years ahead of time, 10 years ahead of time, 5 years ahead of time. We are expected to have draw plans for just about every eventuality. And when something goes wrong, and when a conflict arises, when something is brought out into the public space, and people are unhappy about it, one of the first questions is asked, couldn't you have anticipated this? Couldn't you have thought about this? Don't you have a scenario plan for this? I suspect the social media posts and the subsequent storm of interest over the last 2 weeks was one of the few things that perhaps was not anticipated as a draw plan. But what to do with the property in the house, the heritage values, the conflicting public sentiment, surely this is something that we need to have a draw plan on. So I want to make it very clear that what we're doing, this forward planning, this developing of scenarios, this consideration of public views and opposition views and the diversity of, this is part of how our system works. Coming to Parliament today is a demonstration that our system works, that our governance and our government and the values and the expectations of our public are a marker of our system working. Our ability to talk about this, the documents that have been shared here today, the record of conversations, the record of interactions that we have had, that we bring to bear to make this debate happen, are a marker of the transparency and effectiveness of our system working. The allegations that are being put across, the mechanisms where a separation from the public and the private space, that an attempt to moderate and deal with the influences and potential allegations of abuse of power, these are markers and demonstration of our system working. These are markers of transparency. These are markers of accountability. And accountability around process, around documentation, accountability not just at the top. It has to especially be at the top. And the Prime Minister's talked about that. But accountability extends all the way through. This code of conduct, these values and these processes need to be understood by every officer in that chain of command so that they know when they are being asked to do something inappropriate, that they know that they have alternative lines of reporting, that they know that they can document these things and it will be there as a matter of record for a court, for a special select committee, or for members of parliament to access, to demonstrate, and to debate. Everything we've done so far today, our ability to talk about this in this House is a marker of our system working. And it is the form that many people are carried away with, but it is the substance that is far more appropriate. You can have a special select committee, but if the members on that special select committee don't do their job properly, it will not have the substance. We could have a debate here in Parliament, but if we didn't do our job properly, do our due diligence properly, search for questions, search for problems, search for evidence, search for substance to the allegations and bring them forth in this House, we wouldn't be doing our job properly and we wouldn't be giving substance to the form of a parliamentary debate. I think Mr. Singh's allegations that somehow this is an inappropriate place because members of parliament haven't been able to bring up evidence and bring up substance to the allegations. That's a marker of an absence of evidence. It's a marker of an absence of a problem, assuming that the members of the opposition have been diligent about trying to find a problem. And I'm sure they have. Why wouldn't they? So the substance is important. The words of our Constitution, the words of our laws, the wording of clauses in these paragraphs, they need to be turned into deeds. They need to be turned into deeds to demonstrate that we value them, that we value these processes, and that we value this idea of accountability. And our Prime Minister has held himself up as an example. He set the bar very, very high, but he's made it absolutely transparent what he expects of all of us. Recusal whenever there's the possibility of conflict of interest. The removal of any benefit that you might accrue to yourself. Expose yourself to questioning. Waiving of the parliamentary privilege. These are steps to deal with conflict of interest, deal with possible abuses of power, and remove the possibility of conflict of interest, remove the possibility of an abuse of power. And yet all of these mechanisms are being now criticized as markers of the exact opposite. It's ridiculous. It is inappropriate. But it is of great interest that no one has been able to substantiate anything in this House. If you're going to have a select committee, you need to have some reason to have the select committee, as opposed to just, I wasn't able to do my job properly. One of the more serious allegations involved the issues to do with the Attorney General, conflicts of interest. I'm going to leave some of my colleagues from the Ministry of Law to answer that. The other serious statements are slightly contradictory. I just want to highlight a few of these. Ms. Quick-Shayin pointed out a few of these contradictions. You want this thing to be settled quick. Do you want it to go to the courts? That's only going to drag it out. You want this thing to be dealt with behind closed doors. A ministerial committee operates behind closed doors. Information is shared with the participants and the people that are called to it. But you want everything out in the public space for reasons of transparency. These are difficult contradictions to navigate. Parliament can't make a private citizen sue their own brother. That's a choice for a private citizen to make. And yet you're asking for us in this parliamentary house to make a decision about a private act. You want to strengthen the standing of Singapore. But when you stand up in this house, are you weakening it? Are you generating confidence in the public sector and the public servants and the public sector officers that try to make the system work? All of them have an understanding of what it means to separate the public and the private. This is part of their professionalism, their expectations. You want public transparency, and yet you expect that ministers can't post on Facebook. When allegations come in, when fake news comes in, when misinformation comes in, we're not allowed to post on Facebook to counter this. We leave those allegations and that misinformation and disinformation out there. You have to decide what it is you want out of this process. We all want for Singapore to be stronger. And a big part of that is going to be taking a position on whether our system of governance, our system of government, and our parliamentary democracy is correct. Not that there are no problems. Not that there have been no mistakes. The problems and the mistakes are there. The question is, do we have a system that can detect it, that can deal with it, and to prevent it from happening again? Are you trying to bring down this house? You shouldn't. You should stand by the values of this house. You should accept that this is a good place and the right place to bring these issues out, to have the debate. And if there are allegations, make them. If there are facts to substantiate those allegations, bring them here. And if it's appropriate, further action can and should be taken. But no one has said this. No one has been able to substantiate this. There are some things that the Workers' Party and all the other MPs agree on. But this is something that really should go away and back into the private space because there are no substantive allegations on the issues of abuse of power. I also share Mr. Lau's sentiments about the bright red line between the public and private space. This is the essence of good government and good governance. It is exactly the key issue, that the public and the private space must be separated. But everything we have heard so far is detail after detail, document after document, attempt after attempt, in order to achieve that separation. And you can say it's separated, but it is the actions and the deeds that you take in order to make that separation real, make yourself accountable, that are far more important. And we have had a detailed explanation of how the Prime Minister has done exactly that. I agree with Mr. Lau's sentiment that we should end this now, or as soon as possible. How? A suit is not going to end this now. A select committee is not going to end this now. End this saga now is a very nice throwaway soundbite. I'm sure it'll come up in a headline. But how can you follow that up by asking for the saga to then be protracted by a whole bunch of other mechanisms? End this saga now because you are satisfied that you haven't been able to bring any evidence to bear. End this saga now by standing up here and saying that you are satisfied with the explanations that have been given, that you understand the process of governance and government and parliamentary democracy. Then there will be a strong, bright line. Then our system will be stronger.